Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Canada Pavilion at COP15. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Rachel Vallander. I'm the Director of External Engagement and Partnerships for COP15. Bonsoir à tous. Je vous remercie d'être avec nous aujourd'hui et je vous souhaite la bienvenue à Pavillon du Canada à la COP15. Je m'appelle Rachel Vallander. Je suis la Directrice Engagement externe et partenariat pour COP15. C'est avec plaisir que je vous présente notre prochain événement, Leadership canadien en matière de bien-être des animaux et de la biodiversité, de nouvelles voies dans cet espace, organisé par Protection mondiale des animaux. I'm pleased to introduce our next event this evening, Canadian Leadership in Compassionate Conservation, New Voices in This Space, hosted by World Animal Protection. So please join me in welcoming Melissa Matlow, who will be moderating this event. Melissa, vous avez la parole.
Hi, everyone. I'm Melissa Matlow, the Canadian Campaign Director for World Animal Protection, and it's my great pleasure to welcome you to our panel presentation and discussion, Canadian Leadership in Animal Welfare and Biodiversity, New Voices in This Space. I would first like to acknowledge that we are on the unceded traditional Indigenous lands of the Kainai-Gahaga Nation of the Haudenosaunee people. Kainai-Gahaga is known as a gathering place for many First Nations, and we recognize, give thanks, and honor them as the traditional custodians for the land and waters on which we gather today. We hope this conversation today will help us work better to honor our relationships to the Kainai-Gahaga, the lands, the waters, and the animals with whom we share this home. Now, a bit about myself and what I bring to this conversation. I have an academic background in ecology. I am passionate about animal welfare and systems-based change, and I care very much about learning from Indigenous peoples who have understood those interconnected relationships between animals, nature, and people all along. When I learned that 80% of the most biodiverse regions remaining on the planet are inhabited by Indigenous people, that the Indigenous-led conservation area, Seal River Watershed in northern Manitoba, is 99% pristine, and that the rare 4,000-year-old black oak savanna in High Park in my home city in Toronto exists today because of the caretaking of Indigenous people and their practices, I am filled with such gratitude to the Indigenous people who took care of those ecosystems and hope for what we can do by supporting Indigenous-led biodiversity protection and governance. I am also very interested in hearing the perspectives of youth and being reinvigorated by both their frustration and their optimism. Their voices are so important. They will be the new decision makers safeguarding our planet at such a critical time. And I also want to acknowledge that I'm continuing to learn and unlearn so I can do better at including and amplifying these perspectives from leaders who have traditionally been underrepresented. The intent of this event is to amplify and give a space for these groups to speak on the issues and not speak on their behalf. So before I introduce our amazing panelists, I want to review the format and set the stage for the themes for our event. Our panelists will deliver 5-minute presentations, and then we'll have a 30-minute roundtable discussion around 3 key themes. Let's go to them. So the first one, yes, there we go. The first one is the importance of animal welfare to protecting biodiversity and the health of animals, people, and our environment. So just a bit of background on this, because this might be the first time animal welfare has ever been brought to the stage of the Convention on Biodiversity. So some people might be wondering, why is it important? Well, some of the top drivers of biodiversity loss and pandemic risk, industrial livestock production, and the commercial wildlife trade, are industrial systems that depend on poor animal welfare to be successful. So it's our proposition that animal welfare could be a big improvement to transform these systems and simultaneously advance the protection of biodiversity and global health goals. Now, there have been a number of reports by UNEP and IPBES acknowledging and recognizing these drivers and these interconnections, and there have been some progress, although slow. In March of this year, the United Nations Environmental Assembly adopted the Sustainable Development Nexus Resolution. It calls on the United Nations to complete an expert report on the links between animal welfare, the environment, and sustainable development. And we thank the Canadian government for playing a leadership role in seeing this resolution passed. There's also the Global One Health Joint Action Plan launched by the UN Quadripartite on One Health. It will create a framework that integrates the systems and capacity for animal health, people's health, and environmental health to better prevent and respond to health threats like pandemics. Now, our presenters are also invited to provide examples of Canadian leadership in this animal welfare nexus space. And by leadership, we don't just mean government. We're looking for examples of leadership from youth, from NGOs, Indigenous leadership, scientific leadership. We're also going to hear more about the Jane Goodall Act, a bill that's before the Canadian Senate right now, and I think that's a fine example of Canadian leadership in this space. And it connects very much to our third theme, which is how to include and amplify the perspectives of Indigenous people, youth, and other underrepresented groups in this space. So today's opening remarks are going to be provided by Senator the Honourable Marty Klein, a Cree Métis and Canadian senator who introduced the Jane Goodall bill. And we have a recording for him. And I think maybe that was back a slide. No, you've got this.
Thank you for your interest in Canadian leadership in animal welfare and biodiversity. I'm speaking to you from Ottawa, Canada, on the unceded lands of the Anishinaabe Algonquin Nation. I'm a senator from the province of Saskatchewan, Treaty 4 territory, and I'm a member of Little Black Bears Band. I'm the Senate sponsor of the Jane Goodall Act, also known as Bill S-241. This is an initiative in Parliament to support the well-being of wildlife in captivity and the conservation of species. Based in science and Indigenous values, Bill S-241 proposes the strongest legal protection of captive wild animals in the world and supports action to address the unsustainable global wildlife trade. The Jane Goodall Act builds on Canada's 2019 laws on whale and dolphin captivity and shark fins. The legislation also responds to the federal government's 2021 election commitments. The Jane Goodall Act would ban new captivity of over 800 wild species at roadside zoos, including big cats, bears, wolves, many primates, pinnipeds, dangerous reptiles, and more. Due to the cold winter weather in Canada, Bill S-241 would also phase out the captivity of elephants in Canada, and the bill will allow for more wild animals and reptiles to be protected in the future. As well, the Jane Goodall Act addresses the unsustainable global wildlife trade by supporting measures on elephant ivory, rhino horn, poaching, invasive species, disease risk, and data collection. The bill honors Dr. Jane Goodall, world-renowned conservationist, founder of the Jane Goodall Institute, and UN Messenger of Peace. She has said, and I quote, "The bill is a monumental step forward for animals, people, and the environment. I'm honored to lend my name to this world-leading legislation. Together, we can and we will provide a voice for those who could not speak for themselves," end quote. The author of the original bill is the Honourable Murray Sinclair, one of the most distinguished Indigenous leaders in Canada, who served as chair of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission regarding our country's colonial history. He has said, and I quote, "The legislation will further reconciliation with the natural world. When we treat animals well, we affirm our relationship with all of creation and act with both self-respect and mutual respect," end quote. I'm honored that the Jane Goodall Act has the support of Canada's 5 leading zoos, 6 national animal advocacy organizations, coastal First Nations, and the whale sanctuary planned in Nova Scotia. My hope is this bill can be a model for the world. The Jane Goodall Act reflects the renewal of Indigenous leadership and values in Canada, and the hope young people have for reconciliation between all peoples and with nature. Thank you, merci, and hai kitatamayan.
So now to introduce our next speaker, Michelle Hammers is the Wildlife Campaign Manager for World Animal Protection. She has a Master's in Science in Animal Biology and Animal Welfare and is a member of the Royal Society of Biology and is an expert on captive wildlife welfare and has conducted research on the commercial wildlife trade across Canada. Please give a warm welcome to Michelle Hammers.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for having me. I'm so thrilled to speak about animal welfare today. A couple of years ago, when I got hired by World Animal Protection, I did not imagine being here. So World Animal Protection is an international animal protection organization. We have offices around the world in China, Kenya, as well here in Canada. And today, we weren't sure what our audience would look like, so we thought we'd start with the basics, talk a bit about animal welfare in this space, because we're not quite sure what the familiarity is. So to begin, the definition of animal welfare, which I think the World Organization on Animal Health, or the WOW, define it very eloquently, is the physical and mental state of an animal in relation to the condition in which the animal lives and dies. So this is really to say that an animal is more than a biological robot, you know, that they need more than just the food, the water, and air to breathe. They take initiative, they plan, they have family lives, right? And we need to take that into consideration if we want to use them for our benefits. Wait, there you go, that's better. So what happens with poor animal welfare? So we're all talking, you know, these couple of days and the next couple of weeks about biodiversity and having healthy systems. But in order to have healthy systems, we need a healthy biodiversity, and the elements within it need to be healthy. So when we look at animals, it's not only animal health that we're looking at, because let's say for people, right? If we are under stress all the time, if we are hungry or in pain, our productivity declines, and we're more likely to fall ill because our immune systems get compromised. And this is exactly the same what happens to animals when they're under stress. And the way that we're currently using animals, especially in the wildlife trade, where they're shipped all across the world, they are under high stress, which impacts them, but now we know also us. So animals are not like plants and rocks, and this might sound silly, but they're sentient, so they have the capacity to feel pain, they have the capacity to feel hunger and stress, but also positive emotions, like happiness, pleasure, those kind of things. And these are things I think that are very critical to keep in mind. So it's not only an ethical and moral thing to think about. With COVID-19, we know that our relationship with animals is critical to also keep ourselves healthy. So even when people talk about, you know, some people kind of smile when they hear the work that I do, but in the end of the day, selfishly, it's very important that the welfare of the animals that we trade and that we use and that are around us that they are healthy and the welfare is safeguarded. So then a little bit about the wildlife trade. So this is something that we work on, especially the commercial wildlife trade that impacts captive wildlife, so exotic pets and animals in captivity, like in zoos. The trade itself is a global trade. Billions of dollars are involved, and millions of animals are shipped around the world every single day. It can be legal or illegal, and just imagine there are tens of thousands of species. So this idea that we can regulate the trade, recognize the species that are legal or illegal, it's quite complicated. And we know now as well that the legality of the trade in animals can change whether the animal is in a certain place at a certain time. So for enforcement, it's incredibly difficult to understand that difference and to make the differentiation at our borders. Our work largely looks at the legal trade. There are a lot of organizations, some of our friends are right here, they work a lot in the illegal trade. For us, we think that the legal trade is quite important because it's under-regulated. We often don't know the impact that we have on animals that are being traded, whether it's biodiversity, welfare impacts, or the impact on public health. So what we are advocating for is a precautionary approach to flip the system really. So to say we can only use and trade animals if we know it's safe for people, safe for humans, safe for the environment, which mean like invasive species, like we have many talks at this event and in these days about invasive species, which is a huge problem. So from our perspective, protection should be our default. And from that foundation, we can make good decisions about how we can use animals in certain ways when it's needed. Because in the end of the day, if we don't take care of our animals and their welfare, when they suffer, we end up suffering.
Thank you, Michelle. Our next speaker is Christine Smith-Martin. She is the CEO of the Great Bear Initiative Coastal First Nations and member of the Haida Nation and the Lax Kw'alaam community. Christine is passionate about creating opportunities for young people that instills in them the value of traditional knowledge when planning for future economic developments. And on the heels of the big announcement from the federal government yesterday for the Great Bear Sea Initiative, we're so pleased she could be here to tell us more about the great work that they're doing. Thanks.
A bit worried about not being tall enough. This kind of seems like it's a little tall. Good evening, and my name is Christine Smith-Martin. My Haida name is Hatjela. I come from the Yaqlonis clan of Haida Gwaii, which is in northern British Columbia, our beautiful territory. I first want to acknowledge the beautiful territory that we're gathering on here today. I'm always so in awe of the territories that I come. I can feel your ancestors when I come to visit your beautiful territories of the Mohawk people. Before we begin, I always think we're such visual people, and before I go into my presentation, I wanted to share a video of the work that happens in our community. So if we can share the video.
The marine and the land and everything in between is all so connected. You have to look at it as one area. The Great Bear Rainforest is a special place, and that's why we're working so hard to protect it.
We have the responsibility of retaining and protecting the ecological integrity of the territory.
As long as we keep those laws upheld, our way of life will never cease. If there's one thing that I can make sure that my children pass on to the next generations is our way of life. The values that my grandmother's teaching me and the values that her grandmother taught her.
It's important to take Western science and weave it together with what we have, because what it's doing is reaffirming ancient stories and history.
The Canadian identity doesn't exist in an authentic way if there aren't places where there are big trees and grizzly bears and vibrant First Nations cultures, and then there's no one better than us to preserve it, because this is where we're from, this is who we are.
Without salmon, we don't have a culture. Without the language, we don't have the culture. So those things we really need to pay attention to.
we're still here. There's so much potential for us to do amazing things. This is work that my children are going to be doing, and my children's children are going to be doing. This is what we've always done and what our ancestors have always done.
That's always so beautiful. I'm always taken back at our beautiful territories. Before I start sharing a little bit about Coastal First Nation, I want to acknowledge Daniel. He's one of our youth from all the way from Haida Gwaii. I was so excited. I looked at him, I said, that looks like Daniel. So I'm so glad that you're here, Daniel. Coastal First Nation is proud to support the Jane Goodall Act. We're very, very excited and trying to figure out ways that we can support the important work that you're doing. The Act is one of the strongest legislations in the world for animal protection. And we thank and we acknowledge all those who have made it possible. We'd particularly like to recognize our own Senator Murray Sinclair, who first introduced the bill, and Senator Marty Klein, who reintroduced the bill and is championing it. It is a reminder to all of us that the transformative change is possible. Coastal First Nation is an alliance that includes Wichino Nation, Halschuck Territory, Kitasoo-Xexi, Newhawk, Gitgat, Metlakatla, Gitgatla, Old Masset, Skidegit, and the Council of Haida Nations. Our community is located in Canada's Pacific Coast, and our traditional territory represents 1/4 of the world's last remaining coastal temperate rainforests. Let that set in. It's a huge, huge area. For more than 20 years, we've been working to create a sustainable coastal economy. They are the foundation of the work that we've been doing in our communities, and we've been doing it for about 14,000 years. So I think we know a thing or two about conservation and economy. Our communities have their own concept of respect in nature and stewardship that we do based on our culture and our traditions within our community. We have been observing in our communities the environmental impacts that are happening in our traditional territories and the rapid speed in which climate crisis is happening. And we know that our traditional knowledge that comes from our communities blended with the science knowledge is what's going to help us come back from this climate crisis that we're currently in. Our communities have been champions in this area. For example, the Great Barrier Rainforest is known for our grizzly bears, our spirit bears, our wolves, our eagles. And it is very important. These play a significant role in our rainforest ecosystems, our culture, and our economies. Coastal First Nations has taken a bold step to protect our bears. In September of 2013, 9 of our nations announced a ban on commercial trophy hunting within their territories. Biologists, economists, and thousands of British Columbians agreed with us. And in 2016, CFN Great Bear Initiative secured an agreement with British Columbia for a moratorium on commercial trophy hunting in our territories. The bill and the legislation is not just about protecting the animals, it's about our people too. It has increased the jobs in our communities by eliminating the trophy hunting that was happening. It is really important that we understand that it does not align with our values from our communities. It has transformed our communities. We no longer see hunting and them taking away the carcass of our grizzly bears, our bears in our communities. Now people are coming into our communities. Now people are shooting bears with cameras in our communities, not with high-powered guns or rifles. And we have stewardship offices who work to protect the lands, the waters, the animals, and the Indigenous guardians that we have in each of our communities that go out, ensure that they protect every single day. They're out in the waters, they're out in the lands to make sure that there's no poaching happening, to make sure that our stocks are protected, and gathering information so that we can make informed decisions. In conclusion, I would like to talk a little bit about, really very quickly, because we only have 5 minutes and I'm probably at 6 now because I've seen someone giving me the 5-minute mark. I'd like to talk a little bit about as you mentioned earlier, the PFP, the projects for permanency that was announced yesterday in 4 of the regions across Canada. The PFP is a unique funding model that laid the groundwork for years to come that will allow our guardians in our communities to continue their work on our lands, our oceans, and on our territory. And their job is to protect, to gather information and ensure that we know what is happening on our ocean and in our traditional territories. We as Indigenous knowledge holders have respected the interdependency of our lands, waters, and people for the last 14,000 years. We know they are connected. The work that was announced yesterday with the PFPs in the Great Bear Sea, by protecting the marine, we are establishing a good relationship with our bears. Our bears are not going to be hungry because we're protecting the salmon. They are all interconnected. When we protect the salmon, we protect their food source. It's not just about the bears, it's about the eagles. It's about the bears bringing them into our forest and nourishing the beds of our forests. They are all interconnected. And so yesterday's announcement was a really important step for Canada in acknowledging that Indigenous conservation led by Indigenous people is the pathway forward. So I want to acknowledge all the hard work that has happened in our communities to bring us to this place, and our journey to restore the knowledge and restore the territories from all that has happened to them. We see it. We see the overfishing that happens. We see the overharvesting that was happening in our territories, and our job is to protect those. We have set a table with the announcement yesterday. We've invited many partners to come. This is Indigenous-led. The federal government was invited to come sit with us as we do this work. Our provincial government will be invited to come sit with us as we do this. Philanthropic communities. It's going to take all of us to be able to deal with what we're dealing with now. I really want to thank the organizers today in inviting Coastal First Nations. We really support everything that you are doing, and we want to also extend, if there's anything else that we can do, we know the important work is ahead of us. And we really want to acknowledge and thank you for all of the hard work you're doing. Hawa, thank you.
Thank you so much, Christine. It's so inspiring. Our next presenter is Alison Cuffley. Alison is the Indigenous Relationship Manager for the Jane Goodall Institute of Canada. Alison has a passion for two-eyed seeing approach to policy development and promotion of One Health ideology in all of their work. Alison has been involved with the animal welfare sector for most of their career as well. So give it up to Alison.
So much, tough act to follow. Wow. Hi everyone, my name is Allison. I want to go to my slide. There we go. So I want to talk to you today about some leadership that's happening that I've been so fortunate. First of all, I'm so grateful to be included on this panel with such esteemed people. It's really been wonderful. So the program that I help manage is called Uncovering Common Ground, or UCG, and the original intention was actually to bring together Indigenous and non-Indigenous youth and partner organizations to foster better relationships, work towards decolonization and reconciliation. This year, we have been incredibly fortunate through building of reciprocal relationships to actually have an all-Indigenous cohort. So through that level of community-centered conservation, we have the youth address the 3 intersecting crises in their work. This also means that it's completely directed by the youth, which is something different that JGIC is doing than a lot of ENGOs. This means that in 2022-23, we addressed a major barrier to volunteerism by hiring youth project leads, which are a paid position that it deals with the administration. We build in capacity building to the contracts. This ensures that the maximum amount of resources actually stay in the community, and then the projects that the youth have directed are sustainable and continue to go on. I was at a great session this morning, and I made a little note that someone wanted to clarify that capacity building doesn't mean that there's no capacity in the communities. In fact, these communities are at the limit. There is so much asked of them. An element of environmental inequity is also these traditionally marginalized communities are now being looked to for leadership in the sector, as well as facing the brunt of most of the fallout of some policies. So I want to clarify that with capacity building, it's more about helping youth and helping their communities kind of organize their capacity in this funding ecosystem that unfortunately everyone needs to go to. So through the reciprocal relationships and in our strategic planning, we did identify these 3 intersecting crises of climate change, biodiversity loss, and environmental inequity. These 3 crises are interconnected and need to be addressed simultaneously. As Christine mentioned, land guardians are covering that conservation gap, and they're covering it in a really wonderful way as people who are out on the land, people who know the territory. At least on the West Coast, my understanding of land as well covers water. So I think that that's something that other ENGOs need to continue showing leadership with, especially in the part of youth directing that work. As mentioned in my description, I'm a bit of a nerd about One Health, which is really an interesting thing to think about in that it's a concept that's tens and thousands of years old. For those of you not familiar, One Health methodology is the thought of the interconnectedness of everything in the world, people, animals, and the environment. So all of our youth projects actually do this in a very indirect way because they use traditional knowledge, they use the teachings that they've been given by their elders, which are all rooted in One Health anyways. I've been very fortunate to be taking an IPCA planning certificate, and one of the instructors is Eli Enns from Tlayaqueot, and he talks a lot about the livelihood aspect of continued land care policies, which I think is also something that can kind of be missing from these conversations, and it's very important. Our ancestors not only survived, but they thrived in the environment. All of their decisions were rooted in natural law and consideration for the benefit of the future generations and respect for the past generations. Canada as a country is founded by the coveting of resources, and we've seen the boom and bust nature of this. It started with furs, it went into timber, and we're seeing this with the oil and gas industry as well. Indigenous peoples knew that these industries couldn't go on forever. So slowly, slowly we're catching up, and that's part of the reason why we're all gathered here today, is that we really do need this total shift in a value system. That we need to learn to value things in their totality, not just what it can generate for you economically. Young people, Indigenous youth leaders, all of these people are making a compelling case for the societal shift because they face the consequences of our actions. The Jane Goodall Act is actually the start of a wonderful shift in Canadian legislation away from this extractive valuing of animals in particular. We're no longer looking at them as just generators of profit for things to view for our entertainment. Marty is going to go into more detail about the act itself, but I wanted to have a quote from our founder, who has actually released a statement regarding COP15, in which she calls on world's leaders to listen to the voices, young people, Indigenous people, and we must take action now and together to restore the biodiversity that has already been lost. Thank you.
Thank you, Allison. Our next speaker is Marty McKendry. He is a lawyer and parliamentary advisor to the Honorable Marty Klein. He has a master's in philosophy and a law degree and has been instrumental in the drafting and introduction of the bill to create the Jane Goodall Act, the bill that also led to Canada's ban on whale, dolphin, and porpoise captivity. And he's helped pass the ban on shark finning and legislation to expand marine protected areas. So please give a warm welcome to Marty.
Thank you very much on behalf of Senator Marty Klein. It's an honor to be here. My goal today is to give you a sense of what Canada's Jane Goodall Act is all about in working to pass Bill S241 this Parliament. The legislation would establish the strongest laws for captive wild animals in the world and address the unsustainable global wildlife trade. Based in science and Indigenous values, the Jane Goodall Act is an example of a policy change that promotes both individual animal welfare and species conservation, along with public safety, including as many of the species covered by the bill are dangerous. The bill is supported by a coalition of Canada's top zoos, including the Toronto Zoo, the Calgary Zoo, and the Montreal Biodome, right here, plus national animal advocacy organizations, including the Jane Goodall Institute of Canada and World Animal Protection Canada. So let's dig a little into the details. The Jane Goodall Act builds on two Canadian laws passed in 2019. The first is our federal ban on whale and dolphin captivity for entertainment, made through changes to criminal animal cruelty and international trade laws. That law bans live captures. It also bans breeding, imports, and exports of whales and dolphins, unless licensed for their best interests or for scientific research. As well, the law bans using these species in performances for entertainment purposes. And notably, coastal First Nations endorsed the whale bill, which was a huge boost to the legislation at the time, as it was extremely difficult to pass. And the bill also passed through Indigenous leadership and determination in the Senate of Canada, particularly from the Honourable Mary Sinclair, who was the Senate sponsor of that legislation. The second model behind the Jane Goodall Act is our ban on shark finning and shark fin imports. Canada was the first G20 country to pass such a law. Both these models address individual welfare and conservation by restricting harmful practices that reduce wild populations. Canada's whale captivity and shark fin laws have also influenced international developments on these subjects. And of note, both policies passed as well through the support of the Government of Canada, particularly the Minister of Fisheries and Oceans at the time, the Honourable Jonathan Wilkinson. Now the Jane Goodall Act would ban new captivity of over 800 wild species at roadside zoos and as exotic pets. These include big cats, such as lions and tigers, bears, wolves, hyenas, many primates, including great apes, pinnipeds, such as sea lions, and dangerous reptiles, such as crocodiles, giant pythons, and venomous snakes. And to give you one example of a practical consideration, there's estimated to be about 4,000 privately owned big cats in Canada, which I certainly find astounding. The Jane Goodall Act will also phase out elephant captivity in Canada with our cold weather and considering elephants' characteristics and needs. In addition, the bill bans using all affected species in performance for entertainment, as well as banning elephant rides. The bill's NOAA clause allows the federal cabinet also to protect more species by executive decision. In addition, the bill creates a framework for animal care organizations, including zoos, aquariums, and sanctuaries that meet 5 criteria. This allows them to continue their animal welfare, conservation, science, and education programs. The criteria are to uphold, number one, the highest professionally recognized standards and best practices of animal care. Number two, whistleblower protection. Number three, no use of animals in essentially circus-style shows. Number four, responsible acquisition of wild animals, so not to be capturing them from the wild for this purpose. And as well, any standards set by government through expert advice, so the bill can, in a way, continually improve over time. This framework does support captive breeding for conservation, such as the Toronto and Calgary Zoos programs to reintroduce endangered species to the wild in Canada. Importantly, the Jane Goodall Act also supports regulations or amendments to address the unsustainable global wildlife trade. This is a priority for Dr. Jane Goodall. Such changes may address elephant ivory, rhino horn, invasive species, zoonotic disease, chytrid fungus affecting amphibians, poaching and illegal collection of wildlife, with parrots being one example, and data collection. The bill's policies have the scientific endorsement of Dr. Goodall and other global leaders in the field, including over 20 elephant experts. The Jane Goodall Act is also an example of Indigenous leadership and values around respecting nature. The preamble invokes the concept of all my relations, an Indigenous understanding that all life forms of creation are interconnected and interdependent. The bill also fully respects traditional and sustainable Indigenous harvesting of wildlife and related trades. And Senator Klein and the Honourable Marie Sinclair are very grateful to Coastal First Nations for their support. The bill's next steps are hopefully committee hearings starting early next year. Another important consideration is that the Jane Goodall Act would fulfill the Government of Canada's election commitments to introduce legislation to protect animals in captivity and to address wildlife trafficking, including elephant ivory and rhino horn. And this is reflected in the mandate letter the Minister of Environment and Climate Change, the Honourable Stephen Guilbeault. Thank you, and I look forward to our discussion today.
Thank you, Marty. That's certainly a lot of examples of Canadian leadership. Lots of sometimes I forget how many different pieces of legislation, all the incremental steps to get there, but there's been a lot of progress and certainly a lot more to go, but that gives me a lot of hope. Our next presenter is Francine Povif. She is the co-founder of the Canadian Youth Biodiversity Network and is a strong advocate for animal welfare, youth mobilization, and biodiversity preservation. She is currently a doctoral student at the University of Ottawa. Give it up for Francine.
Wow, they say leave the best for last, but I'm not sure that's the case right now. I don't know how I'm supposed to follow those lovely speeches up. Firstly, I want to thank World Animal Protection Canada for allowing me to speak today, and to my amazing speakers on the stage as well for allowing me to share this space with them. When I was 20 years old, I attended my first SUBSTA meeting in Montreal. If I was not given the opportunity to do so, I wouldn't be standing on the stage today. There we were able to meet the Global Youth Biodiversity Network, which we became a chapter of. A few youth in that meeting decided, you know what, let's do the Canadian chapter, and that's how we came to be the Canadian Youth Biodiversity Network. We officially launched in May 22nd, 2019, and that's the International Day of Biodiversity, if anyone knows. I'm so happy to be here today and to say that we are now an organization with 14 coordinators from across Canada, and for the first time ever, we were able to bring youth delegates that are in the stage today, actually, or on the crowd today. Yes, give them a round of applause. Thank you for being here. So the Canadian Youth Biodiversity Network is a network not to speak for youth, but to give a voice to youth. We want our platform to be a voice for the youth across Canada, for Indigenous youth, for youth that are historically underrepresented. When we decided to bring people to COP, we thought of that. We brought people from different provinces, especially from the Northwest Territories. I'm going to give Christine a shout out who gave me these lovely earrings. Auntie Beads on Instagram if you want to follow her. Cute shout out. But that's what we are. We're a youth organization. We want to be heard. We want to be at a table. So I don't want to take up too much more time, but I want to say to everyone in the crowd, youth are ready for action. Listen to us, work with us, and continue to collaborate with us. Thank you.
Work if I just hold it? Awesome. Wow. What fantastic presentations. Thank you all. So we're going to now go into the roundtable discussion. I have a number of questions, and I think we'll just pose the question and see who wants to answer it first. No one needs to feel like they need to answer all of them. First question, the obvious one, is why is animal welfare important to biodiversity and the work you do? Who would like to take that question first? Oh, nice. Yes.
So I might as well start off.
Thank you, Christine.
For us as Indigenous people, they're very much connected. You can't do one without the other. And when we talk about animal welfare in our communities, they are very much connected to the salmon preservation that we're doing in our community. If we don't have salmon there, then our bears, as I mentioned earlier, don't have their food for the winter. The eagles don't have their food. So for us, that's a great indicator of what's happening. We always look at the water. We look at the land to see. You know, I know a lot of scientists go out and they check this and check that to see how it's going. Our elders go out and they are able to tell what's happening and able to tell that there is unsustainable fishing that's happening in our territories. We have whales that are showing up in Haida Gwaii and all along the coast that are dying and showing up on. Those are indicators that our systems are not all right. So when we talk about biodiversity and we talk about welfare of our animals, it isn't sometimes in terms of them dying, isn't sort of human where they're making them die, but they are making them die by overfishing. They are making them die by taking our herring away so that the whales don't have any food sources. So I think for us, it's a bit different. You know, that's why you see our people out, I guess what the media calls protesting. We're protecting those whales. We're protecting, you know, the bears. It's our job to make sure that they have food sources.
Thank you for that, Christine. It was a presentation I heard yesterday, and an Indigenous woman talked about the importance of protecting caribou because of caribou culture, and just that whole point of animals even passing down knowledge for the other animals to survive. And I also wondered if, you know, there's just different terms used. Maybe animal welfare, you know, isn't a term that's as used as much in Indigenous communities. Are there different terms for this?
Well, I think understanding our kinship that we have to animals, as you can see on my vest, and Daniel with his regalia, he would either have a raven or an eagle. We are very much connected to these animals on our territory. So, you know, when we talk about the protection of them, they are kin to us, and that's how we view them, very much so. So I think for us, it's you know, I don't think I've ever heard the term animal welfare, but I guess that's what we're doing in terms of the work we're doing. I can only think about the work that Health Chuck is one of our communities They were going to open up a herring fishing in there, and the numbers were horrible, and yet they were still going to try to open it up. And the elders said, you know, if they open that up, our whales are going to starve. Someone's got to protect it. And the health check went out, and they would not allow any fishing and herring happening in that territory. They shut it down themselves. They said they ain't going to happen. They had all the boats out there. They had all the support from the coast, and they shut it down for 2 years to give it some time to go back. So I think when we do that, that's protection to us. That's animal welfare. That's how we're protecting them, is by setting up those blockades so that we don't allow people to go in and fish and over harvest. And that's how we view it.
Thank you. Who else wants to answer that question? Francine, yes?
Yeah, I mean, for me, like I mentioned, I've always loved animals and I just didn't know how to help. And, you know, our education system told us, you like animals, become a vet. So that's what I thought it would do for most of my life. And then I went into political science, and now I'm sitting in a stage at COP15. But animal welfare is so important to me because I see the relationship, and like Christine was mentioning, if they suffer, we're suffering. It is not us apart from biodiversity. We are part of biodiversity. Every action we take, everything we do, impacts animals, plants, species, ecosystems. So to be able to promote that on my stage and to be able to promote a term that is honestly not commonly heard of or not understood as much on a platform for young people who might feel the same way and say, how can I help an animal, is so crucial. And I think being able to share that with youth is so important and will inspire future generations to want to take care of animals in a way that's sustainable, not only for the planet or for animals, but for us too.
Thanks, Francine. Marty?
Thank you very much. Having had the opportunity to learn from people like Senator Sinclair, I would say animal welfare and conservation are both about treating other beings with respect. And working on the legislation, I could comment on this in the context of captivity, which is a focus of the Jane Goodall Act. So we could think about the harms of to wild populations caused by negative forms of captivity, where animals are actually being captured from the wild for the purpose of display. And on the other hand, in some contexts, captivity can play a role in saving endangered species. So in those contexts, you would want to consider both animal welfare and conservation. And in fact, one interesting statistic is captive breeding has played a role in over half of the cases where extinction has been prevented for birds and mammals. One famous example would be the California condor. And in Canada, captive breeding is playing a role to save species like black-footed ferrets, whooping cranes, burrowing owls, greater sage grouse, Vancouver Island marmots, and eastern loggerhead shrikes. And the Calgary Zoo and the Toronto Zoo, for example, have large programs. And then for some species, there wouldn't be really much conservation value in having them in captivity, and the welfare concerns would go against any new captivity. So, you know, that would be the case with whales and dolphins, at least in the view of Canada's Parliament. And as proposed by the Jane Goodall Act, that would be the case for elephants in the Canadian context. Thank you.
Thanks, Marty. Michelle, you want to?
Sure. So how I came to this job is that, you know, here we try to elevate voices that might not be heard as much and should be heard. And I think one thing with animals is like, we don't listen to them and they don't have this platform. And I think when it comes to animal welfare, you know, there's this incredible body of science and indigenous knowledge that shows that they're sentient and that they have family relations and that they have culture, as you said, right? And that if we are able to, or if we need to use them, because I mean, we need to eat, we need communities to thrive as well, there needs to be some sort of back and forth relationship, I think, and there needs to be respect, and there needs to be an acknowledgement, like, hey, if I take this animal away from its natural habitat, that's going to impact not only this animal but like other, we have this spring bear hunt in Ontario, which means like that mother bears can get killed, so they leave their cubs behind. So like, and that is an impact on the welfare. So I think there is so much evidence that these animals are so much more than how we treat them often. And in addition, like we work a lot on captive wildlife issues. And as Marty mentioned, there might be reasons that captivity is there for a reason, right? Because we might destroy biodiversity and we don't want animals to go extinct. But at the same time, we have a responsibility when we bring them into captivity that the welfare is safeguarded and that they're not used just for our pleasure, for our entertainment. So I think that's where that comes in.
Thanks, Michelle. Yeah.
I try to stay humble because every day I'm confronted with this amazing group of youth that are just so much more competent and wonderful than I am. So my work is supporting them. But I think kind of drawing links between what the other panelists were saying is that the work that JGIC does with youth focuses on language and cultural revitalization, which is so key to that, strengthening that bond between peoples and animals. And what you were speaking about before is about the ancestral knowledge that the animals hold. So I think it's about just making sure that youth who have not had opportunities necessarily to get that knowledge because of colonial policies and because of the genocide is very important to continue to make those links because of the intimate ties to culture and language.
I think we've heard too of just animals being kept in captivity the longer that they've, if some animals will suffer more, and maybe Michelle, you can say this more eloquently than me, but just their ability to even cope in captivity can depend a lot about how long they were in the wild and all the knowledge they have from being in the wild.
Yeah.
Want to pick that up?
Sure. Yeah. No, I mean, that's true. I mean, especially when we look at mammals, the mother teaches them what to do and how to survive. And we can't replicate that even if we try, right? We have successful introductions and reintroductions, but a lot of them are unsuccessful because we don't have the answers. And I think that's something that we need to acknowledge, that we don't have all the answers, and we can try to like help nature to recover and help biodiversity and the animals within it to recover by safeguarding what we have and by growing what we have, and yeah, and it's again like respecting those relationships.
Thanks. Our next question is, where have you seen examples of leadership in Canada in this space, in this nexus? I mean, I think a lot of you presented on this already, but are there any other examples that you want to bring up?
I can because they're staring at me from the front row, but I'm going to give a shout out to the wonderful youth that are here with me today from the New Chalmouth Warriors program. Their land care capacity building launches and the work that you guys are doing in your communities is really bridging that gap and is so powerful and is so amazing. Jane Goodall Institute is also privileged to work with Assembly of Seven Generations, who's based out of Ottawa, Kwanlin Dunn up in the Yukon, as well as Treaty 7 people who run an organization called G4 Health. And all of that is just like immense amount of leadership that is youth driven, and it's by youth and for youth, which is really why I think the projects are so successful, because they have that investment in it and because they have the agency and the power, that they're not being directed. No one likes to be told what to do, especially young people. So I think that that's what helps make them so successful, along with just their amazing, amazing attitudes and the, yeah.
I think for me and some of the communities that I've witnessed and been a part of, it's our elders, and our elders are the ones that pass on that knowledge to our young people, to the next generation. The teachings that are behind that knowledge transfer, they are the leaders. That's their responsibility to pass that down. And in some of our communities, they have really great initiatives like the Rediscovery Camp that happens in Haida Gwaii. Healthcheck also has a very similar program where they're reconnecting our youth, our children to the territories. because that is a really important piece, because if you're not reconnecting our next generations to their territories, how are they going to know to protect it? How are they going to know the stories that are part of that specific territory? I was very fortunate. My nanny and my dad's mother, my grandmother on my dad's side, really instilled that in me. That is my responsibility. They brought my grandmother on my dad's side brought me out to the territory. They showed me where my territories come from. So that has really diminished a lot in our territories because of the residential school. The residential schools told our elders not to pass it on to the next generation because that's not a good thing to pass on. So a lot of our elders still hold on to that, a little bit afraid to pass that on because they think it's going to hurt our next generation. So I think leaders in our community are those elders that still, despite all of that, despite the scaredness, that they still passed on the knowledge freely, because it's going to be these youth, it's going to be their job to pass on the knowledge to the next generation in a good way. I'm excited about the next generation because they have grown up in a little bit of better circumstances than my generation, than my parents' generation and my grandparents' generation. They get better each time. So it definitely is the elders.
Elders and youth, and you had said it's all hands on deck with this. We need everyone at the table. I was really moved when you talked about the transition to remove, like it was really coastal First Nations that decided to voluntarily stop trophy hunting on your territories, and that led to a ban on the grizzly trophy hunt, and how that's now transformed into Indigenous-led grizzly bear watching, which is amazing. That is amazing transformative change. Have you seen anything like that elsewhere in Canada or anywhere else?
Well, I only know that particular, my communities that I represent and that I work for are amazing communities. They're very strong communities, and they are very connected to their territories. And so when they continued to see these hunts happening, they took it upon themselves to shut that down. They didn't ask anybody permission. They didn't go to the province. They didn't go to the feds. They said, this is getting shut down. We're no longer allowing this. It's a ban in our territories. And so from that built momentum. They did a lot of work on educating people. Most people didn't even know this still continued. Like, what do you mean? They're still hunting bears? Are you serious? And they're not even, the people who are hunting the bears weren't even from Canada. They were from different countries coming in because their countries already banned it and ours didn't. So what I really know is that our communities, they stand up and they say this isn't going to happen, and then usually the legislation comes after that. But there's a lot of groundwork that they do. They do a lot of educating. They get a lot of people to understand really what the problem is. And part of what we did with the Great Bear Rainforest Agreement is that we set up that agreement. The agreement first started off with about $60 million in an endowment to help transform from logging industry in the Great Bear Rainforest, and now have transformed where there is different jobs that are coming from that money of $60 million. We have transformed that to $483 million in our endowment, and we continue to put more dollars in there from philanthropic, from corporations, from government, because we know it's important work. And so the same with the work that's happening in our communities, that ban and that legislation change is a good example of our communities standing up and saying that's it. The same community also, along with House Checks, stood up and said, we are also protecting this territory, this marine protected area. We are protecting it. Nobody's allowed to go into this area. It's too crucial for us. They did that last year. And now we're talking, we're continuing the conversation about marine protected areas.
Marty? Thank you.
Thank you. I wanted to mention that Leadership can also come from the bottom up. So to give some acknowledgement to the importance of grassroots support for initiatives like the Whale Bill and the Jane Goodall Act, and the difference that can make. Working in Parliament, you really do see that in a way the most influential factor is public opinion. And to give a concrete example, the Whale Bill was extremely difficult to pass. In fact, it's the longest successful legislative process in Canadian history in Parliament. It took almost 4 years to pass the whole bill. And in acknowledging the grassroots support, there was actually one occasion when it looked like the bill was headed for defeat. There was more than one occasion when it looked like the bill was headed for defeat. But in one occasion, so many people tweeted and posted on Facebook and wrote letters into the Senate that it crashed the Senate server. And it actually did have the result of saving the bill. So the Whale Bill would not have passed without, people on social media. And these types of issues can be discouraging. Sometimes you feel like, what can I do? How can I make a difference? So that's a real example of the Whale Bill would not have happened without grassroots support, and I don't think the Jane Goodall Act would have happened without the Whale Bill. And to give one sense of where public opinion is at on this, in Ontario, so one thing the bill would propose is basically a licensing process for new captivity of many, many species. In Ontario, there's a public opinion poll showing that 88% of people in Ontario support licensing for zoos. So I would think a lot of elected officials would take note of that overwhelming public support. So really a shout out to grassroots.
Great to recognize the grassroots, and also let's hope the Jane Goodall bill doesn't take 4 years to pass, but there's certainly so much support for it. So, Francine.
Yeah, and I just love hearing about how much young people come up on this in this conversation, and I think something that's so important to us is getting that mentorship and being heard and being taught, because so many people don't take young people seriously. They think we don't care. I will give an example. I've been to international conferences where there's tables for youth and there's tables of youth full of young people, and there's still conversations going on. Young people don't care. Young people want to be playing video games all day. First of all, do we play video games all the time? No. But anyways, it's so disappointing to see sometimes that that's how we're perceived. And that takes away from the mentorship we could get potentially. And if someone's willing to go and talk to youth instead of saying, you'll hear in the news a lot, well, the youth say, rather than saying, let's put that youth on the table, at the table, let's let them figure it out, and let's let them say what they want to say instead of speaking on our behalf. And I think the leaders are the young people. We see Greta Thunberg at 16 years old leading a global movement, and I see all the youth that are here in the crowd today as leaders. I don't see myself as a leader. I see myself as someone who's supporting my generation and acknowledging that one day I'm not going to be a youth anymore. And we have to inspire that new generation so that they could continue pushing this forward.
I see you as a leader, Francine. Well, let's maybe go to the next question. How can we do better at including and amplifying the perspectives of Indigenous and youth? Who wants to go with that one? What are we not doing right now? Give us some tips.
I'll start this one off again. Sorry, everyone, for hearing my voice so long tonight.
It's your moment.
I think one of the main issues is, like I was mentioning, something that people could do better is listening genuinely to youth and listening to the experiences. And I'm not talking just of non-Indigenous youth. Listen to the Indigenous voices. Like Christine was saying, there's reconciliation happening now, and there's the ability to hear and genuinely understand the learnings that newer generations are getting. I think if people, if stakeholders, if companies, governments were to listen to youth and genuinely listen, not say, well, okay, we're going to put you here and we're going to say we have this one youth on a board or a committee or something. Listen to us, give us that opinion and give us time to figure things out sometimes too, because it's so difficult to not to have to do things like this. But I think that's my biggest piece of advice.
This question is interesting because I think about my career and where I've gone in my life, and as a youth, I was very proactive. I'm sure there's other words my parents would use to say I was rambunctious, but I always made sure that the elders and the leaders in my community understood that I want to learn as much as I can from them. And my dad was a teacher, and of course he said, Christine, you need to go out and get educated, and you need to have your foot in both worlds and make sure it's equal. And what he was talking about is our culture, our territories, and go out and get educated. So I think in terms of getting that experience, because it's really about getting that experience in both worlds. And that's what I've done, is I've got it in both worlds, in our cultural world, in our feasting system. In this other world, I was sitting, at the announcement yesterday with the Prime Minister and kind of looking around, and all I could think about was our ancestors that were in that room with us. That's what it's going to mean. That's what's going to make you a good leader, is that you have both, not just one. You don't get educated and then think, I've got this and I know it all. And you see those people don't go very far in the world. So really encouraging and taking, all of us who are leaders, taking the time to teach. I have, she's my executive assistant. She's got her BA. She's amazing. I said, well, if you take this job, I want you to know that you are going to be in all of those important meetings. You are going to be front and center in those meetings. You're going to learn. I take the time with her afterwards to say, so how come you think, what did you think when I said this? And why do you think I said it? To start getting her to think, because that's what happened with me. People took the time to teach me. So all the youth, continue to ask for that. Leaders will see that you are focused and that you want to learn. And it's not that the youth don't want to learn. My parents and my grandparents, they seen leadership skills in me and they nurtured that. If you want to get somewhere, you have to be very, I don't want to say calculated. You have to be very clear on what you want, and don't just get it in education, get it in both.
Thanks. Yeah.
I don't know if I'm youth. Maybe
You still are for a year.
I don't know, maybe not a year. But I remember growing up that, as Christine said, some people do care, and a lot of youth do care. I think where I grew up, I'm from the Netherlands. I grew up in the South, which was very, a very white, generic society kind of I grew up with. And I was craving to have those platforms and those opportunities to meet with other people of my age, to have these discussions. And I think for me, that was something very, that lacked. And I was so lucky when I came to Canada that I found a couple of amazing mentors that gave you the opportunity to learn and gave you the opportunity to do, I don't know, your first speaking event or public speaking, or your first, and to introduce you slowly to all these aspects. But I think from organizations, what we can do better is playing that connecting role and having a platform for the kids and the youth that if they crave that information, that it's available for them, that would make it a little bit easier. I think for me, I would have liked it to be a bit easier to find those connections that I have now, which took me a very long time.
Thanks. Yeah.
Yeah, I have a little bit of advice for ENGOs and NGOs in general, and what I've learned as well, mentorship also has its place, of course, is also about surrendering power and allowing youth to take that agency. That I think that is something that the sector really struggles with, that we all have missions and we have donors we have to satisfy and we have things we need to accomplish, but we really have to turn that around, because when we give the power back to the youth, you'll be astounded at what they can accomplish, and they will do things that you could never even dream of, and that they have access to these worlds and these places that I think those of us on the cusp of youth and beyond maybe have lost or didn't have to begin with. And I think that that's so important, that from a nonprofit sphere and from a government sphere too, is surrendering a little bit of power and allowing them to have that the ownership over their own future.
Marty, yeah.
Thanks. I just wanted to mention an important legal development that's relevant in a way to empowering people that both former Senator Sinclair and Senator Klein would be very excited about. And that was last year, Parliament passed a law to uphold the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, legally restoring Indigenous jurisdiction in a way that was, sort of long promised in the Constitution, but has not had life sort of breathed into it. So the restoration of jurisdiction opens up lots of, more locally based opportunities. For example, in driving big policy changes, it would often be more easier to get something going at a municipal level or perhaps in a First Nation. And Christine's discussion of, the developments around grizzlies is a great example there. There's another, an Innu community in Quebec has teamed up with a municipality to essentially grant legal personhood to a river as part of the rights of nature movement. So that's an example of where local self-determination can do something that might be more ambitious and outside of more conventional approaches that you would see in Parliament. So definitely recognizing and respecting jurisdiction is an important part.
Yeah, first of all, Michelle and Allison, you're still youth, so don't underestimate yourself. But Christine, I really like your point of saying, sometimes people say, I have this piece of paper that says I'm educated, therefore I am the leader for the next generation. And as an organization for the Canadian Youth Biodiversity Network, we looked at that and we said, you know what, there are a lot of organizations that say the BA in this, the MA or the PhD is so crucial. But you know what? Being able to go out into nature, going out and experiencing life, culture, different identities is so important and brings so much more valuable information than sometimes sitting. And I'm kind of a hypocrite because I'm doing a PhD, but it brings so much more valuable information than just sitting in a classroom reading and reading and reading. If you go out and experience things, and I think that's something that youth sometimes don't get the opportunity to do, or they're not told to do. You're told, go sit in a classroom, and that's how you're gonna move up in the world. Why are we not told, go walk in the forest for half an hour, take care of your mental health, go reconnect with the environment you're in, listen to the birds, watch what's happening, be calm, be present? Because I think that's something that sometimes we're not told as young people, and I think that goes into so much of why there's so much eco-anxiety, eco-grief, because there's no more connection to nature. And I thank you for bringing that up and reaffirming that piece of paper does not mean you are a leader. Having that other life experience makes you a leader as well.
Thank you for that, Francine. You want to respond?
Just one last thing. I was thinking as you were talking about my grandchildren, in each of our home, that's where it starts too. It is our responsibility, my responsibility as a grandmother. My grandchildren, I take them home every year when we go do our salmon, our jarred fish. This year, I usually do it, and they help me. This year, they're old enough now where they could do their own case of fish. So our fish came in at like 4 o'clock. It meant that we're going to be up a little bit later. So around 9:30, my 3 grandsons were getting ready. I was cutting it for them. They were filling it. And my middle grandson says, "Oh, Gigi, I'm so tired. I just want to go to bed." And I said, "So do I, but you can't." And this is why. And they made their own jarred fish. We put all the stuff in that. We watched the boil. They took it off. They had to keep it off. And every time they eat that jarred fish at home, he tells his mom and his dad how much work went into that jar of fish. And that to me is about teaching, because I'm raising my grandsons to be connected to that. I'm raising them to go home and be connected to their home community. They go out on the boat sometimes to watch. They haven't pulled in the net yet, but they're there. And then everybody's talking about the teachings as we're, taking the fish and cutting it and preparing it, and we're thanking them for giving their life so that we can eat. So, it does. And all of you are going to be uncles and aunties and all of those things. It's your job to teach your nephews and your nieces. That's probably the second most important job in those child's life. Is aunt and uncle are like the second parents. So it starts with you. You are the ones that are going to be teaching those young ones, because that's the next generation that's going to come up. So I really want to encourage you that you have important roles now, or you're going to be having important roles, and take it seriously, because it starts at home.
Thank you for that, Christine. Before we go to final thoughts, I wonder if we do have time just to tackle this question, or maybe it could be weaved into final thoughts, but I don't want to let it go. Because I want to bring it back to this convention, the COP15, and sustainability is the word that's being talked around here. And we're experiencing the 6th mass extinction. We're entering a pandemic era. Are we thinking about sustainability in the right way? What is your definition of sustainability? How do we weave in all these things that are necessary for the transformation that's needed to address the biodiversity goals that are before us at this important convention? No, fair enough. Allison.
I can go just because I want to kind of paraphrase something else that I learned from Eli Enns, which is also thinking of your home as the wider sense of your environment and the place where all of your relations live. It's the land, it's the water, it's the air. It's not just your physical structure. So I think that the more people that kind of get on board with that wider understanding, and then weaving in the One Health methodology of it's not just our home, because the fish and the whales and the animals, they don't know our borders. They don't respect that. They go between provinces, between countries. They go across the world using the ocean. And I think that that's something that few people want to acknowledge, or you kind of know in the nebulous way. But by really thinking about this is everyone's home, that's something that would be important to improve it.
Yeah, I'd add on to that. And I think for this convention to be successful, we need to continue allowing that space for youth, like the youth that are in this audience today, to have a voice and have a seat at that table, to consider again and again that all these like transformative and new ideas actually do come from Indigenous understanding. So why are we not listening to them enough? If we want a successful convention, we need to consider these voices, and we need to consider, like Allison mentioned, it is not just us. We are not like outside of biodiversity. We are a part of biodiversity. So whatever we do impacts not only us, but our world.
I mean, true sustainability makes sense, right? We breathe air, we use products, we use the waters, like it makes sense. But I think we have been abusing the word sustainability and what it truly means. And it's a long way to get back to it, because as you mentioned in your introduction, it's like we have so many systems that we've created that are depending on the exploitation of resources, of animals, of trees and everything. And it's kind of, we're going in this downward spiral, and it's hard to break it. But we need to reclaim what sustainability is and what it actually means, which means like you can't just continue to take things away from nature. We can't just keep continuing to consume. We have to let nature repair. We have to give back. We have to make sure there's a balance. So instead of just thinking of the economical perspectives and how we can grow as a society and become richer and consume more, like we really have to rethink this, because if we're going to continue the way we're doing this under the motto of like sustainability, which has, as I said, I think has been abused, we're not going to get anywhere. We're going to get other pandemics. We're going to get, the biodiversity decline is just going to continue, and it's not going to bring us anywhere. So the word itself, I mean, it means something, and the meaning of it is something true and real, but we've just been abusing it in a way, and now it's kind of a dirty word, and maybe we should find something else to kind of describe what that means to have that balanced relationship, but we currently don't have.
Thank you. No pressure, but
I think for us, sustainability, in order to achieve it, means that you have to focus on the co-governance in our communities, because you can say you're going to do sustainable fishing, you can say you're doing all of these sustainably, but if you don't have Indigenous communities at that table to hold them into account, because that's really what co-governance is. It means government's there and we are there, and we are making the decisions together. Until that happens, there's going to continue to be DFO with their Fisheries Act. They're going to continue to hide behind their Fisheries Act. The only change that's going to happen that'll allow sustainable fishing, sustainable hunting, or whatever that is to have our people there with a co-governance, meaning we have just as much power as the government. If we think that things aren't going well, if the herring stock numbers are down, our stewardship offices are coming in and saying the numbers are horrible, that we sit down with them to say we're shutting it down, we need to make this decision. So until that happens, and we are making movements towards that, but I can only speak in sort of our territory. We are looking at those co-governance opportunities, because who better yet to be able to make these decisions but the Indigenous people that live there every single day, not the people that are coming in and kind of taking a tour around and then leaving. Co-governance is going to be the pathway forward in terms of sustainability.
thank you. I think I'm probably going to get the cue to wrap up with final thoughts. We have 3 minutes. Are we getting kicked out? We have time for final thoughts? Any final thoughts? Want to go in a row? Michelle, do you want to go first?
I guess. Yeah. Final thoughts. I think in the end of the day, I mean, we're here together, right? And we have a lot of inspiring events and such. So to me, there's hope. I mean, you know, working on this issue for many years now, you can see things shift, and maybe they don't shift quick enough, and maybe, you know, but things do shift. I think in the end of the day, we need to fix our relationship with nature, with animals. We need to we have to acknowledge that we might not have all the solutions, and sometimes nature is best if we just, like, you know, keep our hands off and let it do its thing, because that's how things have been created, right? Everything is in a balance, and we're the disturbers in that balance. But I'm hopeful. I'm hopeful that, you know, that hopefully this COP will result in something real and meaningful. I think there are so many wonderful organizations doing incredible work. A lot of people in government that we couldn't do without, right? Our champions that are so important to, like, get those regulations in place and make meaningful change. So in the end of the day, yeah, I'm hopeful things will change.
Are you hopeful too, Christine?
Well, I think after yesterday's announcement, I'm a little bit more hopeful, because it's not just about the money yesterday, it's about the commitment to those co-governance pieces that we talked about. I think Indigenous communities now, people are turning and saying, oh, maybe what you're saying is actually true. Maybe we'll listen a little bit harder now, because we're in such a crisis. We're having fires, and you know, we're having bridges that are being washed out in BC, and we don't know the answer, but we're turning to Indigenous communities now, because we have always known the answer. We have been saying the sky is falling for quite some time, and nobody would listen. So I think it's really important now that we also don't put that pressure on the Indigenous communities to solve all the problems of this climate crisis that we did not create. And in fact, we're trying to do the exact opposite. So I think yesterday's announcement was a good step in the right direction, and will allow us to do the work that we're so good at doing. Well, I had a conversation with somebody about our Great Bear Rainforest Agreement and how we were able to, turn it to 483,000. They were like shocked. This is so amazing. Well, that's what happens when you partner with Indigenous communities. We're innovators. We know our territory best. And when it comes to business, also, we're great at it. So I think it's been our Great Bear Rainforest financial agreement has been duplicated in 9 different countries around the world, the work that we're doing. Thank you.
That's incredible. Allison?
I wish I had a chair where I didn't follow Christine all the time. I think that, yeah, that's exactly it. And I think that everyone is here and we're gathered because we know that the current system isn't working. So I think that young people and Indigenous youth in particular, that we have just not really tapped that kind of cache of knowledge and the cache of skills and the cache of passion that exists in those communities and within those groups. And I think that that's going to be the key missing piece. So from an NGO perspective, building those really meaningful reciprocal relationships that are based on trust, that are based on giving the youth the agency to do that work and to really advocate for themselves is important.
Thanks. I'll close with a quote from a Canadian hero for Indigenous rights and values, including respect for nature. And this is from the Honourable Murray Sinclair's speech on the Jane Goodall Act. I quote, "We live in a time of great challenge, with the natural world in peril. However, we also live in a time of great hope, with social values increasingly reflecting a moral and spiritual awakening. We can yet save this beautiful planet, along with Indigenous cultures and knowledge, and the sacred and innocent animals who deserve our compassion. In moving this bill forward, Jane Goodall and I believe that the most powerful advocates eventually will be youth, including her Roots and Shoots organization. Disrespect for animals is taught behavior, and we may find that children have a lesson to teach us. My grandchildren, quite frankly, are excited about this bill, and I hope yours will be too. For any parents and teachers listening across the country, we want to hear from your kids as we look to rediscover their forgotten wisdom about animals. Thank you."
Remind me never to sit last again. But I think, and a lot of the conversations I've been having these days, and people come up to young people sometimes and say, "Are you hopeful that this is going to happen?" And "Are you hope?" I wouldn't be sitting here today if I didn't have any hope that we would be moving forward. And if I'm going to discuss hope, one of my hopes is that one day, instead of us being the historically underrepresented groups, we're just people, we're youth, we're Indigenous representation that is there. We don't have to force it. It's genuine, and it's communication between all of our societies.
Thank you. Thank you, all of you. That concludes our event this evening. And I just want to thank our wonderful presenters who have traveled far to come here and to be with us today. And thank you all for listening and hearing what we had to say. Really appreciate it. Thank you. I just will say we have copies of the Jane Goodall Act if any people are interested. We also have a background on it. Emily can pass it on to you. And we have some swag somewhere. Don't worry, Heather, all this comes back with us.